afternoon and welcome to the NutriMedical Report. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be sitting in for Dr. Deagle today as your host. And since I don't want to interview myself for the full hour, I'd like to encourage you to call in to bring up your questions, your comments, so that we can have a dialogue on the program today. So the call-in number, and it's toll-free into the studio, it's 800-259-5791. In the first segment, I'm going to give you a group of topics that I'm going to be discussing and that are open to us today. But again, I'd like to hear from you to see what you're thinking, what your questions are. And the call-in number, and I'll give this out during the show periodically, is 800-259-5791. Now, I think the most important thing that we have to focus on is the danger of war, which received an upshift in this last week based on the decision by Obama to arm al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria. And I don't care that the apologists for the president say, no, we're just going to give weapons to the good guys. The good guys have no power in the armed forces that are fighting against the Assad regime. I'm not even sure they're really good guys. But there are people who control the military, the main military of the opposition, and that's the al-Nusra Front, which is the al-Qaeda in Iraq-linked organization in Syria, which includes al-Qaeda fighters from Libya, who we armed in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi. It includes al-Qaeda fighters from Chechnya, probably people linked to the Tsarnaev brothers. It includes al-Qaeda forces who were trained in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and in Iraq, funded by the Saudis and Qatar. Now, this is who the president decided this week that we're going to arm. And at the G-8 summit that just took place Sunday and Monday, the president had a very, very chilly reception from Russia's President Putin, because Putin was the only one of the 8 leaders there who told the truth, which is this is an insane policy. Putin had a meeting with British Prime Minister David Cameron, and Cameron said, look, we're going to provide arms because we think that Assad has to go and we'd like you to join us in that. And Putin at the press conference said, are you serious? Are you serious about giving weapons to people who kill their enemies and then cut them open and eat their innards in front of television cameras? And he said, if that's so, then where are these great European values that have dominated the world for the last 3 centuries? Now, Putin's rebuff to Cameron and to Obama led to one of these pictures that's worth 1,000 words. The picture of Putin and Obama sitting there, both looking very uncomfortable, but I assure you that it's President Obama who is the most uncomfortable. And then we had the revelation last night, courtesy of Bloomberg News Service, that John Kerry, the Secretary of State, at the White House meeting last Wednesday, proposed that the U.S. immediately go in and bomb Syrian airfields. That's right. Secretary of State John Kerry, once the pacifist, the man who threw his medals from the Vietnam War over the fence, the man who denounced the American military aggression in Vietnam, he was a Vietnam vet, who ran as a peace candidate against Bush in 2004. It was John Kerry who put forward the demand at the White House meeting last week, which included the Defense Department, State Department, CIA, NSA, and also the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as President Obama. I don't know if he was at the meeting when Kerry proposed this, but Kerry said we should be bombing the Syrian airstrips and Air Force right now. And General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and one of the few serious thinkers, adult thinkers among people running the country, said to John Kerry, this is not like a swift boat operation. You're talking about an entry point into a war in which there's no exit. You're talking about something that would require at least 700 sorties to knock out the Syrian anti-aircraft. And Dempsey backed Kerry down. But that's the kind of thinking that's in the Obama administration right now. So I want to know what you think about this situation and what we can do to stop this war drive. Now, secondly, today it was announced that Helicopter Ben Bernanke, and the reason he's called Helicopter Ben is because he once proposed that you could just drop money out of a helicopter to stimulate spending. Well, he's doing the same thing, only he's not doing it with money out of a helicopter. He's doing it with Federal Reserve money going into the pockets of the big bankers. Bernanke announced there will be no end to quantitative easing, that the Federal Reserve is going to continue to buy $85 billion worth of bonds each month, which includes, I think, $45 billion of mortgage-backed securities and $40 billion of treasuries. I may have it wrong. It may be $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities and $45 billion of treasuries. But anyway, they're going to continue to stimulate the money supply, giving money to banks which are not making loans. They're just using the money to buy and sell the existing quantities of bad debt, which enables them to create new quantities of bad debt. Some of this money spills over into the stock market, and there was a real worry that if Bernanke didn't announce the continuation of quantitative easing in the Federal Open Market Committee hearing the last 2 days, that the stock market might crash. Because if the Federal Reserve or if the Treasury started offering 1.5%, maybe even 2% interest rates on Treasuries, money would flow into that. There would be no need for quantitative easing, but it would crash the stock market bubble. So Bernanke, to calm the fears today, said, oh, don't worry, we're going to continue to hyperinflate the economy. So these are the two topics that I want to start with. Syria, the danger of World War III coming out of Syria, and secondly, the effect of the stimulus policy, which is not a stimulus policy, it's a swindle backed by the Federal Reserve. And then connected to that, of course, is the NSA spying. Did you see the hearings yesterday where people like Michelle Bachmann, that phony conservative, was bending over backwards to kiss the rear end of people who were putting in place a national spy operation? Or Representative Tom Rooney of Florida was praising the NSA? What's wrong with these people? The attack on our civil liberties is across the board, and it's not just Snowden now who's talking about it. There are other whistleblowers who are saying that they tried to do it the right way. They went to their superiors, to the media, to Congress, and no one would listen to them. So the spying is to protect the swindle in the banking and the war policy. So call me and let me know what you think. If you have some questions, if you want to get on the air and talk about it today, call me at 800-259-5791. That's 800-259-5791. That's the studio number here on the Bill Deagle Nutra Medical Report. And when we get back, we'll take a look again at this spy scandal through the eyes of people in Germany, because there were some very interesting comments made in a leading German newspaper today about the spy scandal and about why the spying was being done, including at the G20 conference in London in 2009, when the rooms and the computers of all the participants were bugged by British intelligence. Pretty scandalous stuff. That's not just a scandal, it's a crime. So if you have something to say on this, call us at 800-259-5791. And when we get back, we'll be taking up this question of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung story about why Gordon Brown bugged the G20 meeting in London in April 2009. And this, of course, is quite embarrassing because the British hosted the G-8 summit that just took place, and I wonder if people felt free to talk there. So we'll be back right after this break. To the NutriMedical Report. I'm Harley Schlanger. I'm filling in for Dr. Bill Deagle today. And as I said in the first segment, I'll be happy to take your calls if anybody does wish to talk with me. I have plenty to say if you don't call in, but If you would like to have some chance to ask some questions, engage in a discussion about what we can do about this crisis, you can call me at 800-259-5791. Now, I mentioned in the first segment the article about John Kerry calling for a military strike, U.S. airstrikes against airfields in Syria. And the story in Bloomberg says that it was General Martin Dempsey who asked what exactly would the post-strike plan be. And he said that the State Department didn't fully grasp the complexity of such an operation. He said air operations, this is General Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who in my opinion is one of the few heroes in our country right now. He told Kerry that air operations are not like swift boat operations and that the Air Force could not simply drop a few bombs or fire a few missiles because of Syria's integrated air defense system. And he said it would require 700 or more sorties. Dempsey is said to have argued that a demand by the State Department for precipitous military action in a murky civil war wasn't welcome. Now, you hear that? The military is saying to the State Department, and of course the State Department has quite a record, doesn't it, after the way it botched the Benghazi situation? The military is saying, stay out of this. You don't know what you're talking about. Now, there's a very interesting interview in the English edition of a German paper called the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It's an interview with President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and it's from the June 17th issue. And in it, what you see from Assad is someone talking about what it's like fighting terrorists. And the interviewer says, well, you call the word, you use the word terrorist. Is every rebel a terrorist? And Assad asks a simple question. Does your country allow you to kill innocent people, carry weapons, terrorize citizens, destroy property, and steal? And he says the people bearing arms in Syria are doing precisely this. Whether their intentions are extremist or criminal, they can be correctly labeled as terrorists. And he said, we therefore draw a distinction between terrorists and the opposition, which is political and has a political agenda. But the killing and slaughtering of people amounts to terrorism. Now, Assad went on to say that the attempts to build up these rebels by providing them arms is aimed at supporting the religious fundamentalists, the jihadists. And Assad talks about the importance of secularism. That is, he said, we in Syria consider secularism to be freedom of religion. Christians, Muslims, and Jews with all of their many movements. Secularism is essential if you want to create social unity and a feeling of nationality. There is no alternative to this. Now I ask you, what's wrong with that? And then he goes on to say that what is bad is when fanaticism turns into terrorism. Not every fanatic is a terrorist, but every terrorist is a fanatic. For this reason, I say the concept that underpins our secular country is that every individual has the right to freely practice his or her religion. Now, that's President Assad, who we're being told is a murderous barbarian. He's fighting against people who are murdering Christians, murdering Jews. They're murdering Muslims who are not part of their Sunni Wahhabite fanaticism. And so the fact that the United States is intervening on behalf of so-called rebels who are openly tied to Al-Qaeda led to a very fascinating article in the London Independent the other day by a man named Robert Fisk, who's one of the senior people of all Arab watchers in the media. And what Fisk said is that Obama has now made the decision that the U.S. will be an ally of an Al-Qaeda-linked force in Syria. Now, this kind of news is not new to people who listen to GCN and are familiar with Dr. Deagle, listen to Alex Jones, are not part of the mainstream media. But most people in this country don't know this. Now, most people are somewhat surprised to find that the IRS is being used as a political targeting weapon by the administration, that under the FISA court, there are approvals being given to legally, if necessary or if they decide to, monitor every single phone in this country. Now, in the hearings the other day, the NSA, National Security Agency, was saying, oh, but we don't listen to every call. That's not the point. They have a mechanism by which they could, and they have a mechanism by which they could actually listen to every call via computer and flag any call that has language which is considered to be anti-government or anti-administration. That's the basis of a police state. Now, interestingly, the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, who's not one of my favorite people, if you know from listening to this program, she lectured Obama on this, talking about the concern in Germany for privacy rights. But even more interesting was an op-ed by the chief editor of Der Spiegel, Jakob Augstein, who wrote the following about Obama's visit. Now, let me just preface this by saying that the Germans have been fanatically pro-Obama until recently. But here's what he writes. Those who believed the drone attacks in Pakistan or the camp at Guantanamo were merely regrettable events should stop to reflect. Those who still believe that the torture at Abu Ghraib or that the waterboarding in CIA prisons had nothing to do with them are now changing their views. Those who thought that we were on the good side and that it is others who are stomping all over human rights are now opening their eyes. A regime is ruling in the United States today that acts in totalitarian ways when it comes to its claim to total control. Soft totalitarianism is still totalitarianism. And the editorial is accompanied by a picture of Barack Obama with the caption, Big Brother, a reference to George Orwell's famous 1984 story of a totalitarian state. So as we can see, in Germany, supposedly an ally of the United States, the mood is turning against Obama. The Germans are not sending weapons to the Syrian rebels. The Germans are not supporting the U.S. spying operation. And so what we're seeing now is a potential isolation of Obama. And this is something we'll talk about after the break. Again, if you want to call and talk to me, call 800-259-5791.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place.
All right, we're back with the NutriMedical Report. This is Harley Schlanger from the Lyndon LaRouche movement. I'm one of the national spokesmen for Mr. LaRouche. I also write for the Executive Intelligence Review, and you can look at our website. It's LaRouchePAC.com, LaRouchePAC.com, for more on what I'm discussing with you today. We've been discussing so far events in Syria, the Obama administration's crazy idea of arming al-Qaeda-linked rebels in Syria, just as we did in Libya. And by the way, these rebels in Libya that still have armed militias are moving to take control of that country. Another great success story for the Obama administration. But I want to move now to finance and economics. But again, you can go to our website, and we have quite a bit of information precisely on the connection to al-Qaeda of the al-Nusra rebels who we're arming now in Syria. We may be training them. There may be American soldiers in Jordan training al-Qaeda terrorists. And if you think there's something wrong with that, you're absolutely right. And so this is why we have to have a full investigation of this, not a phony investigation or a cover-up, but we've got to get to the bottom of this. This is the real scandal of Benghazi, that the U.S. has been arming al-Qaeda-linked terrorists. And by U.S., I mean Obama. Now, the other story I mentioned earlier was that Ben Bernanke today announced that he's going to keep the quantitative easing going. Now, why is that the case and why is that important? Well, what we're seeing internationally is an unraveling of a bankrupt financial system that is being held together by distraction and bailouts, and now bail-ins. What we're seeing is the effect of money being pumped into one sector, namely the banking sector, for the banks to use that money to create new leverage against bad debt, against junk bonds, to leverage it up so that banks have cash to continue to buy and sell their own junk and junk from other banks. It's very much what was going on in the period between 2007 and 2008 that led to the crash of Lehman Brothers and nearly the crash of our whole financial system. Now it's on a much bigger scale. We're talking about $1.6 quadrillion worth of nominal obligations in derivatives that are completely unregulated. And so Bernanke's strategy, as well as the strategy of the City of London and the Wall Street bankers who own President Obama, lock, stock, and barrel, their strategy has been to prevent any serious regulatory reform. And so they got behind Dodd-Frank, which essentially is protecting derivatives. Now, you probably didn't see this story last week, but the Congress had a bill about whether or not to regulate foreign exchange derivatives. Now, essentially what foreign exchange derivatives do is that they're financial instruments that are created allegedly to facilitate trade between different currencies, because we no longer have a fixed rate system, it's a floating rate system, and that means that the price of currencies can fluctuate daily. In fact, it does fluctuate daily, and that's how speculators make money. Allegedly, they look for weaknesses or strengths and bet on the weaknesses or go short on the strengths. But in reality, we know from the LIBOR scandal, we know from the foreign exchange transaction scandal, which just came out this week, that they actually set the rates of exchange higher or lower so they can make profits by betting for or against certain currencies in the forms of these derivative contracts. Now, when this came up before the Congress this week, the advice had come from former Treasury Secretary Geithner that this must not pass. There must be no regulation, no oversight, no transparency of foreign exchange derivatives. And the bill the bill that was introduced would have exempted them from any regulation, and it passed overwhelmingly. So your representatives in Congress voted to allow bankers to continue to speculate with no regulation, no transparency, meaning no one knows what they're buying and selling when they're involved in this. And where do you think the money comes from for this? Some of it comes from pension funds, possibly your 401ks. And your losses or gains are being figured based on the corrupt manipulation of these instruments by the very traders themselves. This is exactly what is about to come out of the Dodd-Frank bill when it comes to swaps and derivatives. That instead of writing new regulatory bills to regulate swaps and derivatives, they are writing that they actually have the International Swaps and Derivatives Dealer Association, the ISDDA, writing the legislation that would exempt them from regulation. So that's why Lyndon LaRouche has said getting Glass-Steagall in is the most important thing, because it would throw all this out the window. It would throw Dodd-Frank out the window. And it would force investment banks and commercial banks to become one or the other, either commercial banks, in which case they will be protected under the FDIC, but they will not be allowed to speculate, or they can be speculative banks, which will get no protection from the federal government. Now, just this week, the Republican Congresswoman from Wyoming became the fourth Republican to support H.R. 129, which is the House bill that would restore Glass-Steagall. There are now 65 co-sponsors. and there's one co-sponsor or one sponsor in the Senate. If you want to deal a blow to Wall Street and the City of London, if you want to defeat the cartel of international bankers, the best weapon we would have is Glass-Steagall. And that's why Obama opposes it. That's why Jamie Dimon and the Wall Street bankers oppose it. That's why the Wall Street Journal opposes it. That's why the City of London opposes it, and BNP Paribas, Royal Bank of Scotland, and drug banks like Hong Kong, Shanghai. They all oppose Glass-Steagall because it would put them in prison by making it illegal to do what they're doing, as it was from 1933 to 1999. So we've got to get Glass-Steagall back to stop these financial games. And if you have any questions on this or you want to know what you can do about it, you can give me a call on the program here. It's toll-free. It's a phone number you can just dial and get right on the air. It's 800-259-5791. I know that Dr. Deagle usually doesn't take calls, so maybe many of the listeners are not aware that you can call in. But at least for today, for the next 20 minutes or so, you can call me and ask me, tell me what's on your mind, what you're concerned about, what you want to do. It's 800-259-5791. Now, let me tell you very quickly about this other story from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung about the 2009 G20 summit. Gordon Brown, who was then the British Prime Minister, was going to introduce a global program of bailouts. And they were called Brown's Bonds. And what was going to happen at the G20 group of heads of state was that he was going to try to get them to support this policy of a massive bailout, massive money pumping. And they ended up doing it. But he was afraid that there would be opposition. And so he had British intelligence bug the rooms of where all the delegations stayed, tap into the computers. And then what they did is they told people, listen, if you really want a safe place to go to log onto your computer, there were 2 internet cafes that they urged people to go to, which, of course, both of them were already being wiretapped and eavesdropped upon. So in the G20 summit, every head of state was under surveillance from the British GCHQ. More on that when we get back. Today of the NutriMedical Report, Dr. Bill Deagle's weekly radio or daily radio show. I'm Harley Schlanger from LaRouche PAC, and I'm the host today. And I understand we have a caller, Cecil from Texas. So, Cecil, if you're there, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned a bill that Congress just passed that allowed the bankers a free pass. Do you remember the name of that bill?
Well, it's a bill on foreign transaction derivatives. And I don't know the name of it, but it was just last week, and it was something like a 330 to 30 vote or something like that. This had to do with the legislation that would have required a regulatory agency to have oversight of these trades. As it is, banks can buy and sell these transactions, these financial instruments, without reporting what's even in them. And these are the things that set the value of foreign currencies against each other. So it means that if you're a businessman who's doing business with Mexico or with some country in Europe, and you need to do an exchange rate in euros or pesos or some other currency, you have to get right now you end up buying some kind of risk instrument in case the currency goes up or down. These currencies are being manipulated by these foreign exchange derivatives known only to the bankers who are the ones who sell you the product to protect your own trade. And very often they cheat the people they sell the product to in order to make profits on their own. And they were allowed to continue to do that by this gutless act of Congress.
And that was last week?
Just last week, and it's the Foreign Exchange Transaction Derivatives Act.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
so you can check that out.
Okay, I will. I just found something curious. I've been, for the last, 7 years or so, I've been going to see my congressman. They have here in Austin, and of course the congressman's not there; it's their staff. But I'll go like twice a year. Tell them, don't invade Syria, don't go into Libya. Just like 30 seconds or whatever. And I've gone, I guess, about 50 times now to the various offices over the years. And every time I've gone, I never see anybody else there. Never. And I mean never.
So this is a really important point, because I know congressmen who say that when they do get visits to their office, they pay more attention to that than form letters or emails. And it's really important. I'm glad you brought this up, because we've found that getting delegations to go into a congressional office, first of all, it makes them very uncomfortable because they're not used to it. But secondly, they'll then call Washington and say, hey, look, we had 10 people come in today all worked up about this. And the last time that happened, remember when Obamacare first came out and there were people I think it was the summer of 2009, who were flooding town meetings and going into offices? We've got to do that again. If we don't have that, if people don't care enough to go to a congressional office and express themselves, then we're not going to survive as a nation. But what I'd encourage you to do is try and organize some friends or coworkers or family members or something to go with you next time, and to give them a sense that you're not alone in this concern.
Well, what gets me is, I don't have a family. I don't have children. Most of the people I know, they have children, or they're close to families and all this. And it would seem to me that they would give a damn and just show up for 60 seconds. I mean, it doesn't take that much time. And I don't get it. It just blows me away with all the stuff going on. And, and I'm no Einstein, but, I see
But Cecil, you know what happens. The line from most people is, they're too powerful, you can't change them, you can't win. And we have, I hate to put it this way, but the American people are not showing the courage that we used to be famous for when we stood up and fought the British in the American Revolution, or when we defeated the Nazis and the Japanese Imperials in World War II. We actually had a nation of people who, when push came to shove, stood up and fought for principle. And now you get people who will whine and moan and complain, but don't take the time to inform themselves. And, what we really need are people like yourself, citizen activists, who fight with people and really fight with them. I mean, make an effort to get them, just ask them, look, aren't you worried about your children's future? Because if someone's not worried about the future of their children, they're just not paying attention.
Right. Well, I'll tell you why I do it. I know if I die 7 hours from now or 7 decades from now, and my soul leaves my body and I look back on planet Earth, am I going to say to myself, well, there's nothing I could have done about it. It's not my fault. Oh, yeah, it is my fault. I could have done something on a weekly basis, however small it was. And that's why I do it, because I know that day will come, and the guilt I would feel when I crossed to the other side would just be overwhelming that I didn't do anything. So,
well, not only that, but those people who do put their themselves on the line actually can go to their death with a smile, knowing that they made a difference. They fought the good fight. And whether you win or lose, I mean, we should win this fight. We've got to win the fight. But I think you're touching on something really profound, this question of the immortality of the soul, and that people who just live for the moment are making a big mistake when they think that somehow they can find peace with that.
Right. Well, not me. But anyway.
Well, thanks for your call, and keep going to see your congressman and see if you can get some other people to join you. We just have a couple more minutes. If there's anyone else who wants to get on, it's 800-259-5791. The discussion, the stories I've talked about today, including the threats to bomb Syria that were stopped by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I find this just fascinating that the military is telling the State Department, you idiots have no idea what you're talking about. And by the way, that's General Dempsey also talking through John Kerry to the idiot-in-chief, Barack Obama. And so I think this is very important. It should give people a sense, as in our caller Cecil, that there are some who are standing up for what's right and what's important and what's necessary. And really, That's what you have to do with your life. That's what being human is all about. You fight for the future. You leave a better future for those who come after us. And if we don't do that, then what's the point of our living? You can't take your sexual conquests and your money to your grave with you. You go out with nothing. But what you can do is leave behind a legacy of having worked to improve the conditions for the future, which would have made your life necessary. And at this point, we need people in the Congress to think about those things before they capitulate before Eric Holder or Barack Obama or NSA officials who say, oh, don't worry, trust us, we're not spying on you. They may not be spying on you today, but we now know they have in place the ability to do so. And that's the slippery slope we're on. So go to LaRouchePAC.com. Prepare yourself for talking to Congress, talking to people at church, at work, in your union, in your neighborhood. Got the 4th of July coming up. People should actually study what the Founding Fathers did. They fought the British Empire. And we should make July 4th a holiday where we go back to rededicate ourselves to the principles of the American Revolution and fight against the usurpers. Today's British financial elite who are tied together with Wall Street, who control the President of the United States and use their money and their control of media to keep the Congress under control. If we can get Glass-Steagall through, it will break the power of these financial elites. So that's H.R. 129. Go to your congressman. I had a meeting last week with a congressional office that put in motion a whole series of activities which I think will get more Republican sponsors for H.R. 129. So I don't care if you got a Democratic or a Republican congressman, if your congressman's the biggest gutless wonder in the world, put the fear of God in them by going in there and talking to their office about why H.R. 129 is necessary. If they're a patriot, if they care about this country, they'll get on board and fight to get that bill through. So H.R. 129, you can look up on our website under Glass-Steagall. It's there under LaRouchePAC.com, and it'll give you all the information you need to know on who supports it and what it would do. So I think that what we've looked at today in terms of the war threat, in terms of the financial chaos that's being introduced, there are solutions to it. And it's time for Americans to act as Americans again, to take up those solutions. And I'll be back on next Wednesday for the first hour on the NutriMedical Report with Dr. Bill Deagle. So in the meantime, get active and do something for the future.